Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Cyber Week webinar on professional networking to reduce risk. We have an exceptional panel here today, and I'm so excited for the discussion. Before we dive in, we thought that because this is a panel focused on networking, that it would be great to take some time to introduce ourselves and give some information on our professional histories and backgrounds. I'll start. My name is Kelsey Kober, and I'm the Senior Manager of Policy on the Public Sector team at the Information Technology Industry Council, or ITI. ITI is a trade association representing 80 companies reflecting a variety of industries, including software, hardware, semiconductors, and digital services. In my role, I work with IT contractors and governments at all levels to find innovative ways to improve the technology procurement process. I also help the public and private sectors come together to improve cybersecurity and supply chain assurance within governments. Before, I worked on the policy team at Common Sense Media, a nonprofit organization advocating for responsible technology that benefits kids and families. Over to you, Rex.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Rex Booth. I am Senior Director for Cybersecurity Operations at SailPoint. Excited to be here. I'm coming off very recently, about an 8-year stint as a federal employee. While as a Fed, I was a CISO. I was the Chief of Cyber Threat Analysis at CISA. And then most recently, a Director for Stakeholder Engagement and Senior Policy Advisor at the White House, helping stand up the Office of the National Cyber Director. Before that, I was in the private sector as a consultant and as a vendor at places like Grant Thornton and Mandiant. So thrilled to be here, and I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie Duchesneau. I'm a public policy manager at Google Cloud focused on cybersecurity, in particular US engagement. So a lot of my mandate is doing work around the recent regulatory initiatives in the cyberspace, as well as a lot of our public-private partnership work. I've been at Google about 7 years. Prior to that, I was a program manager focused on compliance and policy in the internet governance and DNS space. And had done prior policy and consulting roles in that space as well. So moved into this, not necessarily having a cyber background, though we had done a lot of discrete campaigns around cybersecurity, particularly focused on encryption and HTTPS adoption, but was able to kind of parlay work that I'd done, kind of translating between engineers and policymakers in that prior role, as we were kind of building out a more product-focused arm of our public policy team, and really excited to be talking to everyone today. And lastly but not least, over to you, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Sexton. I'm a senior policy advisor at Third Way. We're a bipartisan center-left think tank focused on common sense political solutions. I focus on cyber at our national security team. Before this, I was the founding director of the cyber program at the Middle East Institute. So I focus on cyber primarily from a public policy nonprofit angle. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about the very indirect way I ended up landing in this career track. So.
All right, fantastic. All right, let's dive in. So the federal government is currently rolling out several concurrent cybersecurity related initiatives. This includes all the ongoing requirements stemming from the Cyber Executive Order that was signed last year. This includes the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or the new Department of Defense Cyber Audit Program. And also the National Institute of Standards and Technology is revising critical cybersecurity guidance. This flurry of new requirements is likely to be overwhelming to many contractors and potential contractors. Rex, where can these contractors go to receive guidance and support as they begin the process of implementing these initiatives, and who within the government is best positioned to offer assistance?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the answer to it is going to be, very dependent upon, what your focus area is. So look, I mean, if you're a DoD contractor, you're clearly going to gravitate towards the kind of sources of authority for, the DoD regulations. If you're in the civilian sector, you're going to gravitate towards NIST. I will say that, both having been outside and inside, the government and trying to navigate these, various regulations, your pain is felt in, regardless of whether you're outside or inside. It's a frustrating situation. Frankly, it's something that represents a huge opportunity for improvement from, kind of .gov and the federal sector writ large. the systems that we defend, whether they sit in .mil, .gov, or anywhere else, generally speaking, we want to protect them in the best way possible. There's not really, I think, a driving need for us to have these disparate regulations. So, look, just know the pain is universal. I don't know if that's consolation at all, but really just you're going to orient yourself towards the marketplace that you serve.
Great, thank you, Rex. Cyber incident reporting has also been a hot topic in the policy world over the last year. In March of this year, President Biden signed the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act into law. This requires certain entities to report cyber incidents and ransomware payments. Rex, how can a business best work with government partners to mitigate the impacts of a cyber incident after it's occurred?
Yeah, it's another good question. So a couple things. One is that you want to be proactive. If you think that you're going to be in a position, or you think there's an opportunity for you to be in a position where you're going to need to reach out to the federal government, during an incident or after an incident, you want to create that kind of connective tissue, and those connections in advance. The time to reach out is for the first time is not in the middle of an incident, right? So, that's step number one. Step number two is that we got the question a lot in terms of like, who should I reach out to, right? There's CISA, there's the FBI, there's the Secret Service, there's a whole host of organizations, agencies that have, as part of their mission, assisting with kind of a cyber operations or recovery component. The answer really is like whoever you have the best relationship with. Now, look, FBI, CISA, Secret Service, et cetera, they're all going to do things a little bit differently. And that will have a potential impact on, your recovery efforts. But ultimately, look, whoever you have the best relationship with, just reach out to them. They'll sort it out internally. There are efforts underway to kind of normalize the front door for .gov when it comes to cyber incident response, so that people don't need to make that choice. They just make one phone call, and then the government kind of sorts it out internally. It's transparent to, it's invisible to the people that are actually making the call. But we're not there yet. So for now, create those relationships in advance. Have that phone number on hand, keep them warm, and then reach out to whomever you have the best relationship with.
Yeah, great, Rex. You touched on this. I think it's worth repeating and delving further into. I think every crisis management expert would tell you the best time to handle a crisis is before the crisis occurs. Obviously, This is no different in the cyber world. Stephanie, how can contractors and other businesses work with the government now to ensure they're prepared to both prevent and mitigate breaches?
So one thing that I think it's important to think about is having a solid framework for incident response that's in place before the moment that you're going through an incident, which is chaotic and stressful and sort of brings in a ton of different interests at the worst possible time. And even just having that plan in place, and of course that plan is going to look different depending on the sort of role of your organization, size of your organization, complexity of your organization. And ideally you have folks who are specifically involved in security and have a security background who can deal with it. But even if you don't, just having people in place beforehand who are responsible for certain roles when an incident is ongoing, and defining those lanes at the outset can be hugely helpful, because you don't want to be doing it while the actual incident is occurring. To those ends, we've put out at Google Cloud a white paper that talks about our own data incident response, and there's some like really, really simple but helpful guidelines. And one of the things that we speak to is sort of separating out the roles of incident coordination, operational response, and communication related to an incident, and defining those roles at the outset, and having them as sort of separate people with separate responsibilities, just because, and this comes up a lot in the cyber incident reporting context, you don't want responsibilities around communication and reporting, whether it's internal or whether it's external, to sort of be muddled with the people who are actually dealing with investigation, dealing with mitigation. You certainly don't want those obligations to be making it worse. And that becomes all the more important as we're seeing these requirements for reporting proliferate out.
Great point, Stephanie, and I'm really happy to hear your organization has already given this a lot of thought. So shifting gears, diversity, equity, and inclusion has been increasingly more of an important conversation in the cyberspace, and for very good reason. A couple of weeks ago, the Office of the National Cyber Director published a request for information seeking input from stakeholders on how to attract, grow, and train a diverse pool of candidates for cybersecurity positions. Mike, in your view, what best practices can ensure DE&I in the cyber workforce, both in governmental and non-governmental positions?
Yeah, this I think a really good and difficult question, because I think that in so many places systemic oppression makes it difficult for people to find their way. People from backgrounds LGBTQ, racial minorities, immigrants, to be able to find themselves in positions. I can tell you it doesn't just start in the recruiting for the jobs. I have, got a math major, and I can tell you that like the problem at minimum starts in the classroom at the math department of your university, probably before there, but I can definitely guarantee you that there's a racial diversity and gender diversity issue there. So I think the most important thing really is to, in the same way that we kind of think about cybersecurity as something that you should always have in mind. It's not something you think of for a month and then you install this new tool and then you stop thinking about it. In the exact same way, when you're recruiting, when you're putting together a panel or a commission or something, it's always a good idea to be thinking before you begin, how are we going to ensure that diversity is a core part of this? And there are a lot of different organizations right now, like Share the Mic in Cyber, Black Girls Hack, and other organizations like this that are really making, really dedicated to creating a talent pipeline that sort of streamlines this for people from underrecognized minorities, and giving them the advice and the tools and the network that they need to be able to serve their country and their companies.
Thanks so much, Mike. I really like what you said about how this needs to start even before college.
Yeah.
Rex, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, look, this is a problem that I think is well recognized at this point, and thankfully, it has a lot of momentum behind it to try and address. I mean, to Mike's point, this is a systemic issue. It doesn't get solved at the workplace. It has to be solved well in advance. In terms of developing diverse talent pipelines, and there are much broader issues at play. But what we can do, and what we can control is how we go out and how we recruit, how we incentivize the talent pipeline kind of development in the first place. ONCD in July hosted a workforce summit, gathered about 80 folks from universities, corporations, nonprofits, training organizations. We brought them all together and basically solicited from them ideas on how we address these issues. It was a fantastic event, and really I think helped not necessarily start the conversation. Conversation had already been ongoing. We've heard this from Jen Easterly at CISA. We've heard it from other sources as well, but it helped kind of add to the momentum around this very important issue. So it's getting attention. It needs more attention. It needs action. But I'm hopeful and optimistic that it's going to move in the right direction.
Thanks so much, Rex. So funding is always going to be a pressing issue when it comes to strengthening federal cybersecurity. Stephanie, what funding options do contractors have when it comes to the cost of implementing new cybersecurity initiatives? And in your view, how can policymakers ensure a continuous and effective investment in cybersecurity?
So there's like two different parts to that question, I guess. So looking first to cost of implementation and achieving federal cybersecurity, one of the things that's important to consider is sort of what investments it makes sense to be doing in-house and where you can and should be relying on a third-party provider to build out the capabilities. I mean, one of the really good things that we saw as part of the EO 14028 was that it sort of marked a position shift in terms of how the US government was thinking about enhancing its own federal cybersecurity, particularly with respect to embrace of public cloud services, as opposed to simply building on-prem, sort of recognizing that in a lot of places, the only way that you could have access to some of these most advanced security tools and have it at a reasonable cost was by going to a public cloud rather than a proprietary provider. And you see this because of sort of scale, and it makes the marginal cost of these incremental security benefits and these security tools sort of spread across a larger number of users, sort of bringing down the cost of them overall. So that was a really positive shift that we saw in terms of how USG was thinking about funding it. And then there's a few considerations for policymakers, of course. I mean, one, as much as possible to be thinking about what you're appropriating and making sure that you're actually making funding available as part of the mandates. I would say one of the challenges around 14028 is that like a lot of the aspects were unfunded. So you have agencies trying to go out and implement these really revolutionary cybersecurity changes and basically overhaul stuff in fairly short periods of time. And funding is not really expressly provided for that. That's going to create an impediment to doing it. That's going to sort of create churn and slow it down. Wherever possible, there's obviously benefits of having grant programs available that are associated with it. And we're really supportive of what we've seen going out in terms of state and local grants to enhance cybersecurity. And I think like a last note to end on and thinking about this, and this is something that Kelsey and I are always talking about, is that like thinking about funding, there's a real value in terms of wherever you can, thinking about risk-based cybersecurity policymaking and sort of outcomes-based policymaking as opposed to being super prescriptive, because that's going to give contractors and other parties who are going out there and trying to implement sort of flexibility to build on and use what they've already built and invested in to achieve the highest cybersecurity outcomes rather than having to rebuild it just because, you know, it's being conceived of in a slightly different implementation as part of a rule.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. And I'm reminded of that statistic that I hear and use all the time, that 70% of all government IT spend is used for operation and maintenance of legacy systems. I think that the current discussions we're having on cybersecurity have also spawned equal discussions on IT modernization that were long overdue, and I'm happy that we're having these discussions. So this question I'm going to pose to all three of you. What's the most important thing federal contractors and businesses who might be looking to become contractors need to know about cybersecurity? Rex, do you want to kick us off?
Man, that's a big question. There's a lot to unpack there. Most important thing that they can know about cybersecurity. So, I mean, look, ultimately, you know, it is an immensely broad domain. And you know, when people first start thinking about cybersecurity, if I'm explaining cybersecurity to like my kids, you know, we're talking like technology, talking about like, you know, the bad guys on the other side of the internet, stuff like that, you know, very like basic kind of concepts and understanding. But you know, all of us here know, and I suspect the whole audience knows that like the domain of cyber is just absolutely immense, and it touches all components of an organization. There is no one front door to get into cyber. You know, so you can get at it from a an operational perspective. You can get at it from a technology implementation perspective, policy, personnel, compliance, I mean, just runs the gambit. So, you know, if you're looking to build those kind of creds, get those quals together, and looking at it from look, this is a field that I want to get into, don't limit yourself to, just one lens of cyber. There's a lot out there and a lot of ways that you can attack the marketplace.
Thanks so much. Mike, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to, as Rex was saying, and, building on what Stephanie had mentioned about, preparing for a cyber incident, like best practice to kind of deal with, to think about cybersecurity as an organization is to realize that this is a whole of your organization problem. If you work in finance, cyber is still your problem. If you work if you're the chief legal officer or general counsel, it's still your problem. If you work in HR, it's your problem. Oh, it's really your problem. Like I would really encourage, if you're the size of a company that can, get an outside consulting group to maybe host a tabletop exercise with the people in your C-suite. Like, look at doing that and bring these people in, because most likely your general counsel is thinking day in and day out about intellectual property issues, or just the things that you think of as like inherently what lawyers go and do. But your lawyer needs to think about like, oh, so some of these regulations on data security for contractors are binding. Okay, so I need to be in the room then if and when we're talking to the FBI to report a cyber incident. HR needs to be included when they hear like, oh, there was like an employee that we terminated, but someone forgot to get rid of their email address and then they became an insider threat. Like, everyone needs to think about these things. And like, I think there's a sort of expression that Sun Tzu uses in The Art of War that like, you just need like one little like hole in the front of your enemy to be able to like get a surging river through there. And that is like the issue when it comes to cybersecurity. You really need everybody to be on their toes.
Thanks so much, Mike. And you've echoed something I hear all the time from USG personnel, which is they really want contractors and other businesses to think of cybersecurity as a whole organization effort and a team sport in every way. Stephanie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I would just flag is that the sort of trend we've seen in terms of discussions around cyber regulation, we're seeing the same themes crop up in a number of different jurisdictions. We're talking about, incident reporting, software supply chain, open source software, certainly across the Atlantic and beyond. So it makes sense to be making these foundational investments in sort of building out cyber personnel, training people now, and absolutely to what Kelsey was saying before, making the foundational investments in IT now, because this isn't going anywhere. We're just going to continue to see this build out, and totally agree with everything that Mike was saying. We're at a point now where cybersecurity is not something that you can just deal with in terms of having a discrete security team. It's an organization-wide issue. It's a C-suite issue. It needs to sort of be part of the larger IT strategy rather than just having IT and having cybersecurity run as two parallel tracks where you have a sort of security team trying to correct for mistakes and how we've thought about investments in other places. So cyber sort of really needs to be at the core of your strategy for how you're thinking about everything from technology to personnel to process, organizational process.
Thanks so much. All three of you made great points. So we got some questions from the audience in advance of this webinar, and they are fantastic. I can't wait to get started. But just as a reminder, if you have any questions you'd like to ask our panelists, please drop those in the Q&A box, and we'll be monitoring those. So first, what role do government risk and compliance tools play in reducing risk? And have they so far been effective in doing so? Stephanie?
I can't speak to the tooling on the government side because I've always worked in the private sector, but as we're sort of seeing more and more regulatory efforts in this area, we've certainly been making investments in our own internal compliance tooling, which is definitely, as this becomes a requirement in a number of places, really important to not only achieve a high bar of security, but demonstrate that we're meeting the requirements that we need to in order to serve the US government. One thing I would say is, like, as we're seeing sort of parallel regulations proliferate in different areas, it's even sort of changed how we think about using some of this tooling to sort of have controls that move beyond particular regimes. So it's certainly helpful, certainly necessary, but I would also caution that sort of compliance and GRC tooling is not the end all be all. There's sort of compliance controls, but there's also sort of thinking about cybersecurity more holistically and pulled out from compliance. Going back to what I was mentioning before, you need to comply. You certainly need to check the boxes to serve whomever you're trying to serve as a contractor. But you need to also be thinking beyond that. What are the long-term investments that you need to be making in terms of IT? What are your sort of long-range goals in terms of cybersecurity outcomes? I think solely focusing on compliance and compliance controls and tooling this sort of area is moving so quickly, and oftentimes what we see in the compliance checklist does not reflect like the state of the art when it comes to cybersecurity, that you really need to be doing both in parallel.
Great. Rex, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, whenever we talk about kind of GRC or compliance and in general, I think back to an event years and years ago. I was at Black Hat listening to somebody give a presentation, and they just absolutely railed against compliance as like this massive waste of time, and how it was just, imposing upon, whatever brilliance they were bringing to the table. Otherwise, it was just very, very negative. And at the time, a lot of my contracts were compliance oriented, and I don't know, I took it personally or something. But really, it highlights this divide, I think, between some of our practitioners that are more technically oriented, that are more interested in kind of the operational aspects of cybersecurity, and then the less technical folks who are perhaps more compliance oriented, or some of the other facets of our domain. It's important to, I think, acknowledge the value that each one brings to the table. And from a compliance perspective, I mean, look, we just talked about the workforce challenges that we have, in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, but we also have a quantity and capacity issue, right? We don't have as many practitioners as we need. So, we have people in decision-making positions, within the cyber domain that may not be quite the subject matter experts that we want or need them to be. Compliance helps kind of set a standard bar and a standard of performance, for an organization in a way that we can't depend upon each organization to reach by themselves. It's a forcing function. It has value. And, anytime I have the opportunity, I promote the fact that we can't dismiss it. We have to, I think, embrace it for what it is and work with it. It's a valuable tool.
Thanks so much, Rex. I also meet a lot of people in my professional life who rail against the concept of compliance. Reminds me, I'm reminded of a Inspector General report from DoD that came out a few years ago, basically attributing a lot of IP theft to the fact that many contractors were not implementing security controls or best practices. I think that's a reminder of like, yes, you have to do this for a reason, and it's important.
Yep.
So next question, what certifications should a person do if they want to start a career in cybersecurity? Would you recommend obtaining the CompTIA Security Plus certification? Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question. Security Plus is a great place to start. I think CompTIA A Plus and Network Plus are also usually considered to be precursors to Security Plus. Just to kind of to speak on this, I have a Security Plus certification, and it has never gotten me a job. But like this is what I think about certifications. If you work in an office where they will pay, and most places will pay for you to do this training and for you to get the certification because they see it as part of your professional development, do that. In the same way that, like, you get advised by people to invest in your own retirement account, at least up to the amount that your employer will match it. If you don't take advantage of that professional development, you are leaving money on the table. Even if the Security Plus does not get you a job, even if you end up switching into another field, you have left something on the table. And I think that especially if you want to continue into cybersecurity, build your career, get that next job, it is always important to always be learning and expanding your horizons and staying humble and recognizing, I work in cybersecurity from policy angle very well. But the fact is, if you gave me a Security Plus exam right now, I don't think I would be able to pass, because the truth is I don't have those port numbers and all the different protocol names memorized. And as much as I may end up getting a little bit hot-headed about the fact that I can interact with somebody from the CISA side pretty well on this, the fact is that those people that I might feel a little condescending towards at conferences probably have all those port numbers memorized. And I should always be cognizant of that, and always trying to sort of, observe where I can improve and always continue improving. You should always think about your career it as, I mean, it's not a straight line, but I mean, hopefully it never levels off. I hope for you.
Thank you so much, Mike, for that. Rex, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Mike made some great points. He's exactly right. Like, you don't want to leave value on the table. So if there's the opportunity to pursue it without any opportunity cost, yeah, go for it, right? Look, I think certifications serve a few roles, kind of similar in the way that compliance does. It's a forcing function, that it can help an individual expose themselves to new concepts. It can help them learn. But the one thing I think you'll really want to be cognizant of is that when you go out into the kind of the job field, you're looking for a new position. The first kind of interaction that you have with an organization oftentimes is HR. And we talked earlier about HR as part of the cyber domain, but oftentimes that's not something that they know yet, right? And they have a really difficult job hiring people on, trying to identify, okay, who's qualified for what position. They're working with like poorly written position descriptions by managers who just think they should be able to hire whomever they want. I mean, I have nothing but sympathy for HR, but they oftentimes, kind of use very maybe crutches, I guess, to identify qualified personnel, right? And one of them can be certifications. So look, if you want to get your foot in the door in an organization, especially if you're building your career, just know that oftentimes that first contact that you have with that organization is going to be looking through your resume and looking for certifications. If you don't have them, your resume goes into the reject pile. So it's a pragmatic pursuit, if nothing else.
Thanks so much to you both. So I love this question. How do we improve user education by moving away from producing only death by PowerPoint presentations, passive videos and webinars, and reading material? There are many studies proving these traditional methods are not effective at all for corporate education. Stephanie?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think it's sort of important, like anything else, to sort of think about how you learn when you engage. Like for me, I can learn by reading, but I much prefer to follow something that has a narrative than something that's purely didactic reporting. So there've been sort of great books that bring that in and are told from the perspective of someone who's sort of responding to an incident, rather than sort of a PowerPoint framework. Also just sort of having hands-on experience and talking to people. I mean, one of the really great things about how the extent to which the cyber conversation has come to the fore is that, especially if you're in DC, there's just constant networking opportunities, chances to go out, hear from different sort of angles of cybersecurity. And many of these are now back to being conducted in person. So there's networking opportunities. You can sort of meet the panelists, meet other folks in the audience who share your perspective and sort of keep up an ongoing dialogue, which I tend to find more helpful for my own learning than something that's unidirectional. And then on the organizational side, I can't remember if it was Mike or Rex who flagged it, but I think we're going to start seeing bigger pushes to have sort of forms of cyber education that are a little bit more hands-on. So whether that's cybersecurity clinics or red teaming, where you bring someone in and have them simulate what it's like to be on the other side, doing tabletop exercises that force you to sort of think about how you would build out connective tissue, say in the case of an incident. These can sort of be, depending on your learning style, a lot more, and there's a lot of sort of third parties that can come out and help organizations carry some of this out, can be really helpful for people who are not necessarily going to learn the best. One flag, and Kelsey, maybe you can speak to it too, is that there is the cyber workforce RFI, right, that's out right now, that has a lot of sort of questions around how do we do just this and bring people into the workforce and do training through, whether it's through social media where you're targeting younger groups, or how are you going to access earlier points of education to bring different people into the dialogue. I think we're sort of early in the conversation and still figuring it out. And certainly there's a lot of the former, but I think we're going to see more efforts because of the importance of cyber and the pervasiveness of it to bring in different forms of learning that hopefully can bring more people into the conversation and be more effective depending, no matter how you learn.
Thank you so much for that very detailed answer. As you mentioned, it's great that the Office of the National Cyber Director is thinking hard about this as well. And I'm definitely using the phrase death by PowerPoint more often. Like, that's too real. So there have been obviously many high profile cyber incidents in the last few years, impacting both the public and private sectors. Rex, in your work, where do you see the trends in terms of who the bad actors are and where they're coming from?
Interesting. All right. So at a national level, we tend to look at kind of adversarial nation states. We categorize our opposition into Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and then others as well, right? And the phrase that I've heard pretty frequently recently has been that that when you look at the big two, which are China and Russia, that Russia is the thunderstorm, but China is climate change. And I think it's a good capture. I would say that I think it's potentially dismissive, right? And like to kind of brush Russia off as kind of a flash in the pan. I think you need to look at the intent of our adversaries and how they look at us from a competitive perspective. And I would argue, and I'm sure others would argue differently, but I would argue that Russia is looking at us from a more destructive lens, whereas China, look, we have a codependency and a competitive codependency, but they are not interested in tearing us down, whereas the current Russian regime is. So when you look at it that way, I think at least for me, I become more concerned about one party than the other. Not to dismiss any of them. And when you're looking at it from an organizational perspective and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, look, who's going to come after me? There's a few different things that you can do. One is if you're interested in knowing whether you're on China's radar screen, just look at their 5-year plan and determine whether or not you're in an industry that they've identified. It's really awesome. They publish it like a plan every 5 years to let us know if we're interesting to them. And it's very helpful. We're grateful to them for that. But you can really kind of figure out look, am I of interest? But that said, with the increase in kind of supply chain attacks, frankly, we're on everyone's radar screen. It's a very much a many-to-many kind of relationship at this point, and it's really, I think, a fool's errand would probably be saying it too strongly, but I wouldn't recommend trying to figure out who the big bad actors are. Just get your stuff in order, get prepared. A compromise is going to happen. You want to be resilient when it does. Don't worry too much about attribution in advance. That's not going to be super helpful for you unless you are the absolute most sophisticated organizations out there. There's very few of those.
Thanks so much, Rex. And we have a question in the chat. And where can the participants find the China plan that you mentioned?
Oh yeah, just Google China 5-year plan. And they've got a couple. And I'm sure there are China experts out there that are going to be more eloquent than me, but they have the overarching 5-year plan, and there's some supporting artifacts as well that talk about their various initiatives that they have. You can just read through them literally, and they will identify industries of interest, their priorities.
Awesome, thank you. So while America and Europe have made tremendous strides in developing solid cyber infrastructure to defend their systems, the same cannot be said for our African partners. Knowing that we're not safe when some of us are exposed, what policies or strategic partnerships can the US advance to encourage safer cyberspace for African governments? Stephanie, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sorry, so one of the things that I think is worth flagging is that a lot of the investments that we're going to make are like a rising tide floats all ships, right? A lot of the investments that we make are going to have benefits beyond US and Europe, where you see a lot of the regulations being pushed right now. And I think there's also an opportunity now. As I mentioned before, you're seeing a lot of parallel conversations around incident reporting, around software supply chain. As those standards become ideally harmonized and we see sort of stronger baselines that people are converging around, there is an opportunity for those to sort of proliferate out. I mean, we saw it on the privacy side in terms of GDPR. I had worked sort of shortly after we saw that implemented in Europe to work on sort of Kenyan privacy laws that in large were modeled after GDPR. So I think a lot of the investments are going to be the same. A lot of what we're doing to especially say improve the software supply chain are going to have benefits beyond the US. But there's also sort of going to be follow on beyond the US and beyond Europe.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Rex, do you have anything you want to add?
Nothing material. Stephanie, I think, said it all. But I mean, look, this really is a situation where the ecosystem is not, it's not isolated geographically, right? Africa is as much an important component of the cyber ecosystem as any other region in the world. We need to take their security seriously because it impacts the rest of us, if for no other reason, right? I mean, moralistically, there are reasons to do it, but just pragmatically, we need to be assisting them. And Stephanie said, "Rising tide floats all boats." This is a perfect example of that.
All right, thanks so much. So this is another question I'm going to pose to all three of you. What has changed in the last 5 years within the cybersecurity world that we should be most aware of? Mike, do you want to kick us off?
So last 5 years, I think people need to be more cognizant of social engineering scams. Right now, it is, I think, easier than ever for cyber criminals to be able to, like, the infrastructure back end to take and then store your money is like enormous right now in like a broader range of cryptocurrencies. The cryptocurrency explosion has created like an enormous sort of gray space between people who are working in people who are legitimately participating in this gold rush and outright scammers. There's an article in The Verge just yesterday about this black market of journalists who get hacked and lose their verified Twitter accounts. And then people will see, oh, this person with a verified Twitter handle is launching a new cryptocurrency startup. It must be legit. If someone, a live human being at Twitter looked and said, this is a legit person, there is just so I don't mean to just drum up completely ambiguous and directionless fear, but it's really important right now to just stay vigilant and skeptical about what you see and whether or not it's legitimate in your email, on social media, just everywhere you go.
Thanks so much, Stephanie.
I would just say that today's cybersecurity challenges are not new per se. There have always been people who are trying to take it. I mean, maybe not always, but since we've been online, there have been bad actors that are trying to take advantage of security weaknesses. But what we're seeing now is sort of increasing resource, increasing energy, increasing sort of efforts toward exploitation. It's a cat and mouse game, and for a while, I think we hadn't necessarily kept pace. We as a sort of larger ecosystem hadn't necessarily kept pace with that. I think that's hopefully starting to change as we're seeing it become a bigger priority, a C-suite priority. But we're always going to have to stay on top of it. People are going to try and take advantage of whatever the new challenge du jour is. One really good example of this is all of the threats that we saw come out around COVID-19. Those are generally not like new bad actors. They're sort of the same groups that we've seen and have been tracking. But when there's a new crisis and there's a new issue that's sort of creating worry and sort of mobilizing public attention, that's what you're going to see sort of fissures moving towards. So it's not a new problem, but it's more on the fore and there's sort of more tooling behind it. So time to pay attention to it now in the vein of what we've been saying previously.
Great. And Rex?
Yeah, I think I'd highlight it, maybe a couple of things. So, one is that the gap between our capabilities and our adversaries' capabilities is shrinking. So we remain, the kind of the best in the world from an offensive security perspective. But our adversaries are catching up. And more importantly, like, we are the most exposed society in the world when it comes to defense. We are more dependent on our private sector than any other, kind of large, government in the world. And we are more dependent upon technology than most other nations. So our exposure is huge. Our adversaries are getting better. And they're getting smarter in terms of their techniques. It used to be that compromises and hacks were generally like a 1-to-1 kind of ratio, that they would go after a single entity and compromise that entity. Now we're looking at an increased proliferation of one-to-many attacks. So I think in like 2019, there was the China Cloud Hopper campaign. There's been others where they're looking to compromise kind of these central locations where they can get many organizations compromised at once, right? SolarWinds, et cetera. So we need to be cognizant of these kind of changing techniques and approaches and capabilities of our adversaries. From a technology perspective, look, things evolve and kind of to Stephanie's point, look, there's nothing new, there's evolutions, there's kind of spurts of advance. The one thing that I would point out is that quantum cryptography and quantum computing is right around the corner, and everything that you think is safe today might be safe today. It's not tomorrow. It's already decrypted in a future state. So I don't know. Be careful what you think is safe and secret, because it really isn't for long.
Yeah, great point, Rex. I feel like we could have another hour-long webinar just on the issue.
Yeah.
So one more question. I'll pose this to Mike. Are C-suites and VCs more receptive to the upfront cost of securing a new product, either software or hardware? And are cybersecurity policies and the resulting costs harming research and development budgets or hiring pipelines?
So I think this is a difficult question to answer, because I mean every C-suite, every VC firm is going to have a different kind of way of approaching this. But I can tell you definitely from my background, prior to working in think tanks and consulting instead, that an enormous kind of challenge when it comes to cybersecurity is trying to get people in the C-suite to there's always this desire to look at cybersecurity as something where, okay, we've got this budget, we bought this product, and now it's solved, but it's never solved. And something that I think that can go a really long way, possibly, to squaring this circle, is cyber insurance, where essentially you would purchase an insurance plan, and if you get breached, you can get compensated for the breach, and they will adjust what you will pay in premiums depending on, do you have password managers for all of your employees? Do you have two-factor authentication? They will essentially audit your own cybersecurity policies and then tell you you can pay less in premiums if you carry out these measures. And then suddenly it's quantified. The challenge is that to actually work as an actuary in this kind of field, what you require is a great deal of data, and there's not really enough data right now to be able to make these kinds of projections long term. One, two, when you think about risk management, there's a degree of systemic risk. You could work in risk management like all the way up to the fiscal crash in 2008, because you were working based on prior assumptions and projections that were based on prior assumptions. But the fact is, like, everything is interconnected, and if something really basic goes wrong, that can be cataclysmic and systemically problematic. The same thing exists in cyber. We hear about enormous vulnerabilities like Heartbleed and Log4j. I think there's absolutely, a risk in the cyber insurance field that there could one day be some sort of vulnerability in an incredibly basic technology that everybody uses that just bankrupts cyber insurance companies because there's an enormous wave of breaches and they just go out of business. So it's difficult, but at least for now, I think it is a good route if you are trying to get a CEO to really quantify these things, to say, look at a cyber insurance company and then think about how we can reduce our premiums by taking more proactive measures so we don't need to actually rely on them.
Great, thank you. Rex and Stephanie, anything you want to add really quick before we move on to the Q&A?
Just really, really quickly, and I love this question because I feel like it gets to the core of everything we've been talking about, but if it's not, it absolutely should be. Security is increasingly going to become a differentiator, a requirement to sort of compete in different marketplaces. So we're there. It's time for it to be sort of an organization-wide question around how we think about personnel, how we think about technology. So if not now, it's time. The time has come. And on the flip side, the good thing about that is as it's increasingly a differentiator, we're going to see more and more competition on security features. And so I think we're at the moment where it absolutely needs to be treated as a C-suite issue and an organization-wide issue rather than as an afterthought.
Great. Let's move on to the audience Q&A. Thanks so much for everybody, to everybody who sent in questions. We're gonna try to get through all of these. I'm just gonna throw these out to all three of you. So first, are there automated ways to ensure compliance to help reduce the burden on a work group? And are there similar tools to ensure continuous compliance?
I can only speak to our tools. And I don't want to turn this into a product pitch, but we have a software offering, and I'm sure others do too, called Assured Workloads, that is sort of designed to operate against some of the compliance frameworks. And you just basically turn it on and it does the compliance checks against it. But I'm sure there's alternatives available as well. But there are sort of a lot of offerings. I mean, as we sort of move forward with this, I think one of the big goals is to have end users having to do less to ensure both security and compliance, to make it easier and more frictionless. And that's one of, particular to the government, the public sector space, that's one particular product offering that we've sort of put forward to try and do just that. We're sort of doing a different counterpart to that, Assured open source, and putting out verified and tested versions of open source software and making that available for other parties to use. So I do think that this is going to be a growing part of the marketplace as we move ahead.
Great. So another question, what resources are considered the gold standard as it pertains to cyber threat intelligence? Mike?
I think Stephanie isn't really allowed to give this specific answer because it would be a conflict of interest, but Mandiant, which was just acquired by Google, is kind of considered best in class when it comes to threat intelligence. There are other firms like FireEye that are also very, very reputable. I would encourage, I want to caution people when they read, because there are a good number of threat intelligence firms that will identify something and then find a journalist who's a little bit too credulous and will write up a story that greatly overhypes something, so that way then suddenly this small firm that discovered an indicator of compromise gets the big press of wow, you uncovered this new thing that was dramatically over exaggerated in this article. I mean, I don't think I have really good advice necessarily on how to discern the good from the bad journalism if you aren't already a good discerning cybersecurity professional. But FireEye, Mandiant, Proofpoint, also excellent. There are many others. I'm blanking on them right at this moment, but I did want to give Mandiant a shout out.
I'll
So,
just say plus one.
yeah, and as a former Mandiant employee, we did good work. That said, I will say that to Mike's point, there is a wide variety of vendors out there that do great work, and some of them do great work in different ways in different arenas. Like we've talked about, cyber is a broad kind of space. Mandiant traditionally had been very focused on nation state adversaries. Others focus more on what we call commodity malware. Some focus on dark web activities. I would say that the best cyber threat intelligence that you can look for is the one that you can easily consume and operationalize. So, don't necessarily go looking for like the best and brand name, but look for what you're able to make the best use of.
Great. So we have 2 questions left in 5 minutes. I think we can do this. So this question is asking, agree with the assessment of the big 4 nation state adversaries, but curious to hear perspectives on the increasingly well-funded, highly organized criminal adversary that's often targeting critical infrastructure for ransomware, blackmail, and IP theft.
Yeah. Look, ultimately, when you're being attacked, it doesn't matter who's attacking you. You just want it to stop. And I think that, for those of us who've kind of been in, not saying this in a self-aggrandizing way, but who have operated in some of the kind of the more elite circles of cyber threat intelligence or operations, some of us have had this a proclivity to be dismissive of what we consider to be more rote or commonplace either attackers or activities. Ransomware we used to kind of dismiss as like whatever, let me know when the Chinese are knocking down your door. That's a very kind of myopic perspective, and ultimately, like, if you're in charge of the security of an operation, it doesn't matter who it is, it doesn't matter what's happening, it just matters that like your organization is being interrupted, your business flow is being stopped, and you want to fix it. So cyber criminals, absolutely very much an issue, and the blending between cyber criminals and nation states is, look, there's a lot of, you draw that Venn diagram, there's a decent amount of overlap there. So there's a lot to unpack there, but generally speaking, it doesn't matter if you're being attacked, who it is, you just want it to stop.
Yeah, and looking to the work that our trust and safety teams do as well, like economically motivated cybercrime is a huge part of that, and something that we're working on every single day. So totally agree with Rex. You can't count it out.
All right, great. One final question. What are some of the things that you all would like to see changed in terms of workforce development to help improve the cybersecurity pipeline?
So I'll just say, like, I think there needs to be less gatekeeping. There had traditionally been a culture within cybersecurity of elitism and a very technically oriented focus, whereby if you didn't come to the table with really solid technical skills or technical acumen, you were dismissed out of hand as like not being worthy of a seat at the table. Thankfully, that's changed. But I think it needs to continue to change. That pendulum has not yet swung in as far as it needs to in the other direction. So, when I look at the workforce, I look at something that needs to be far more inclusive. It needs to be far more welcoming. We're moving in the right direction, but we've still got work to do.
Great. Mike, Stephanie, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's a lot of really good work underway, but I think that going back to the earlier conversation around diversity and inclusion, concerns around whether the good content and the sort of networking opportunities and the trainings and the certification, whether we're getting to the right diverse audiences that we need to be bringing in. And I think that's a place where there's a lot of room for change and still room for improvement.
Yeah, and this I think is probably a pretty might be a couple of pie in the sky kind of answers, but I think there should be more. I think there should be enormous reforms to the way that the United States government conducts security clearance investigations, which is a huge pipeline for people to get the training really on hand at like the cutting edge of this stuff. It's an incredibly lengthy process that I would argue is like systematically discriminatory against people from foreign countries, particularly China, against people with like family relationships in Israel. So, I mean, I think that that's something huge. I also, I mean, love to one day see the possibility of like a national service program that like where you know out of school you can like just go and volunteer to work in cybersecurity in a low level at like you know state police department or something junior enough where you know you're not accessing the crown jewels, you're not going to be able to leak something enormous, but you can get hands-on technical experience. When we talk about like workforce pipeline, I mean, this is something that the Israeli government has managed to do very, very well because they have national enlistment in their military. Once you turn 18, you go and you serve in the military or in cyber intelligence. And so they have an enormously disproportionate pool of talent because these people get these skills immediately when they graduate from high school. And I think that if we had that more civic-minded kind of whole of civilization strategy here in America, that would go a very long way in terms of diversifying and growing our workforce.
Great. Thanks so much to all three of you. We are at time. Thanks so much for everybody who attended this webinar. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Everyone have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.